The sun was dipping low, casting long, golden streaks across the tarmac. Steven Seagal walked steadily, his bag resting lightly on one shoulder, every step deliberate. There was a quiet rhythm to his movement, the kind that made people notice without him saying a word. The jet sat ahead, engines humming softly, metal glinting in the fading light. Security personnel had formed a small barrier near the stairs, their posture firm, expressions unreadable. They weren't loud. They didn't move aggressively. They simply stood, a wall of authority. Around them, the low chatter of staff and the distant rumble of other aircraft filled the background. Steven slowed his pace slightly, not out of hesitation, but to take in the scene calmly. Every detail mattered. He could feel the slight tension in the air, the shift in the way people looked at him. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone demanded attention. The guard nearest to the stairs lifted an eyebrow, adjusting his stance subtly, as if testing how far Steven would go. Steven's hand brushed lightly against the strap of his bag, his eyes scanning the area with quiet awareness. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was forced. He moved as though he belonged there, yet he was an outsider in that controlled space. The faint hum of the jet's engine mixed with distant footsteps, a soft rhythm that mirrored the steady pace of his own steps. Staff glanced at one another, sensing the unusual calm he carried. Some shifted slightly, unsure what to expect next. There was a subtle pull in the atmosphere, almost imperceptible, a quiet weight that seemed to settle on everyone near the tarmac. Steven's gaze remained steady, taking in the formation of the security without flinching. Every movement of his body, every small gesture was precise, controlled, purposeful. The warm light caught the edges of the jet, highlighting its sleek design, but it was the quiet figure approaching it that drew all the attention. People paused mid-step, subtly slowing their own movements, their eyes tracing his path. Even the distant sounds of engines and conversations seemed to fade against the rhythm of his approach. His feet moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured, as if he were marking time without urgency. The guard shifted slightly, the faintest sign of unease, a subtle reminder that even stillness can carry weight. Around him, the atmosphere was tense without aggression, expectant without noise. The air felt charged in a calm way, a silent anticipation that made every movement matter. Steven adjusted the strap of his bag again, lightly, without urgency. He walked closer to the plane, every inch deliberate. Staff subtly angled themselves, watching, waiting, sensing the tension he carried without him needing to speak. His shadow stretched long across the tarmac, paralleling his calm, steady approach. The golden light shifted, brushing against the metal of the jet and glinting in his eyes as he moved. There was a quiet understanding in the space around him. Every person present felt it, even if they couldn't explain it. The tarmac was alive with movement and noise, yet he seemed to move through it untouched, composed. Each step toward the stairs was measured, his posture relaxed yet alert. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't announcing himself. He simply moved, and the world around him reacted subtly, almost instinctively. The guard nearest to the jet didn't say anything yet, but his stance shifted, a subtle tightening of muscles, a micro-expression of acknowledgement. Steven's gaze swept the area briefly, calm and unshakable. The distant voices, the faint sounds of other jets, the shuffle of shoes against concrete. All of it became a backdrop, almost irrelevant, to the presence he carried forward. He continued his steady walk, bag swaying lightly with each step, eyes forward, body relaxed. Every observer, every staff member, even those glancing from a distance, felt the quiet command he projected. He reached the point where the stairs met the ground and paused just for a heartbeat, as though marking a threshold, before taking the next step with the same measured pace, presence undisturbed, focus unwavering. The guard stepped forward, planting his feet firmly on the tarmac, arms crossed loosely, but with an unmistakable firmness in his stance. His eyes locked onto Steven, unblinking, measuring, testing the waters. "Sir, you can't board right now," he said, voice steady, carrying authority without aggression. Stephen didn't react immediately. He paused, just a fraction of a second, letting the words settle in the space between them. His shoulders remained relaxed. His hands adjusted slightly on the strap of his bag, a movement so subtle most people would not notice, but enough to signal awareness. Around them, other staff shifted slightly, some stepping closer, some glancing at each other, sensing the tension in the air. Whispered conversations flowed quietly behind Stephen, small murmurs that couldn't distract him. He didn't flinch. He didn't tighten his jaw. He simply gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible, a signal of acknowledgement, not submission. The guard's lips pressed together for a moment, considering the calm that faced him, trying to gauge if this was hesitation, arrogance, or something else entirely. Stephen's eyes scanned the perimeter, calm but alert, taking in the people, the jet, the barriers, the open sky. There was no rush. No motion was wasted. His presence alone shifted the energy, quieting the murmurs around them, drawing attention without a word. The guard adjusted his weight slightly, 1 foot forward, 1 foot back, subtle but deliberate, a silent message of control. Stephen's bag swung lightly at his side, a natural movement, yet it carried a rhythm that matched his deliberate breathing, slow, measured. Around them, the tarmac seemed to pause. Even distant sounds, the low hum of engines, the shuffle of other staff, seemed to fade against the quiet tension of the moment. The guard spoke again, slightly louder this time. "You need to wait." Stephen didn't respond verbally. Instead, he shifted his gaze toward the stairs, then back at the guard, eyes steady, unbroken. The small movement of his head carried authority, quiet and unyielding. Other personnel began to notice the unspoken dynamic, a subtle recalibration of expectations. The guard's hand twitched slightly at his side, an almost imperceptible adjustment that signaled a minor internal question. How far could he push without provoking an uncontrolled response? Stephen didn't give any hint of threat. There was no flexing of muscles, no sudden motion, no tension in his shoulders. His calmness was deliberate, unshakable, like the eye of a storm. It drew the guard in, forced him to measure his own actions carefully, aware that any sudden movement could shift the balance. The murmur of voices behind them grew quieter, replaced by a collective anticipation, as if everyone on the tarmac could feel the weight of the silent standoff. Stephen's stance was subtle but precise, 1 foot slightly forward, weight balanced, arms relaxed at his sides. His bag rested naturally on his shoulder, every motion minimal, intentional. The guard's brow furrowed slightly. He spoke once more, voice firmer. "I said you can't board." Stephen's gaze remained fixed, unblinking, a gentle but commanding acknowledgement of the authority being projected at him. He didn't challenge it with words. He didn't assert himself through volume. He simply existed in the space, every movement calculated to demonstrate presence without conflict. A faint breeze rustled lightly across the tarmac, catching the edges of the jet and the uniform of the guard, but Stephen's composure remained unmoved. Each second stretched longer, measured, deliberate. The guard's posture tightened just slightly, fingers brushing the seam of his pocket, small micro-movements betraying his attention to every subtle detail Stephen displayed. Observers began leaning in, some shifting weight from foot to foot, phones in hand, capturing what was unfolding. The tension was magnetic, the energy tangible. Stephen's eyes flicked briefly to the other staff, registering their positions, their movements, their attention, then back to the guard. It was a quiet survey, not of threat, but of awareness. His breathing remained steady, controlled, matched to the rhythm of his movement. There was an almost hypnotic quality to the calm he exuded, a stillness that seemed to demand attention without demanding anything. The guard hesitated, shifting his stance again, 1 step forward, 1 step back, unsure how to respond to the patients before him. Stephen's gaze softened just enough to indicate observation rather than challenge. The subtle control he maintained over himself, over the space, over the perception of those around him, created a psychological pull that was nearly impossible to ignore. Time stretched, and the silent standoff became almost a performance of restraint. No one spoke. Every motion mattered. The guard's voice finally broke the quiet, sharper this time. "I need you to wait your turn." Stephen lifted his chin fractionally, acknowledging the request without objection, maintaining an unbroken calm. Every step he had taken to this point carried weight, and that weight was fully present in the air between them. The subtle shift of his bag on his shoulder, the micro-adjustment of his posture, the quiet, unwavering gaze, it all conveyed one thing: awareness. Not threat, not challenge. Awareness. The staff nearby watched in silence, each person sensing the unusual gravity of the moment. Every breath seemed deliberate, matched to the slow unfolding of tension. Stephen's calm was deliberate, magnetic. The guard's jaw tightened slightly, the smallest hint of uncertainty crossing his expression as he continued to measure the quiet force before him. The energy on the tarmac had shifted. Observers leaned in instinctively, drawn into the subtle drama that required no words, no loud movement, only presence. Stephen stood there, balanced, grounded, unmovable, a figure of quiet authority in a space that demanded compliance without aggression. Every second held weight, every small motion magnified. The standoff continued, measured, precise, unbroken. The guard's eyes flicked briefly toward the other staff, then back at Stephen, searching for any sign of hesitation or uncertainty. Stephen remained steady, his posture relaxed yet alert, each small movement measured. The bag on his shoulder shifted slightly as he adjusted his weight, his breathing slow and controlled. Every detail mattered. Around them, the hum of the jet's engines blended with the distant shuffle of personnel, yet the tension hung thick, almost visible in the space between them. The guard's fingers twitched at his sides, a subtle display of the growing awareness that this was no ordinary encounter. He stepped a fraction closer, testing boundaries, and Stephen didn't flinch. He didn't tighten his jaw. He simply shifted his stance ever so slightly, enough to maintain balance, enough to signal control without confrontation. Staff standing nearby watched, noticing the silent dance unfolding, feeling the weight of the unspoken challenge. Whispers drifted quietly through the air, barely audible, yet they carried a collective curiosity and unease. Every eye on the tarmac tracked the interaction, sensing the slow escalation. The guard's tone hardened slightly. "You can't board without clearance," he said, voice calm but edged with authority. Stephen's gaze lifted toward the stairs, then back at the guard, unbroken, steady. The pause that followed felt longer than it was, a drawn-out silence that amplified the tension. The subtle shift in Stephen's stance, the slight tilt of his head, conveyed awareness without aggression. Observers instinctively leaned in, sensing the delicate balance of power. The guard adjusted his posture again, shifting weight from one foot to the other, a micro-movement that betrayed his heightened attention. The surrounding staff subtly mirrored his stance, as though ready for an unexpected movement. Stephen's calm was deliberate. His hands remained relaxed, lightly brushing against the strap of his bag, a controlled rhythm that contrasted with the tightening tension of the space around him. The distant sounds of engines and footsteps seemed muted, irrelevant to the silent standoff. Each second stretched longer, the air charged with quiet anticipation. The guard took another small step forward, the tiniest hint of challenge in his movement. Stephen didn't respond aggressively. He didn't raise his voice or tense his muscles. He simply adjusted his footing, grounding himself more firmly, demonstrating presence and control through subtlety alone. The surrounding staff instinctively held their positions, watching for any sign of escalation, every nerve alert. Whispered words passed between them, half guesses, half warnings, as the atmosphere thickened. Stephen's eyes swept the area, calmly noting each person's stance, each subtle gesture. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, didn't react to the minor provocations or shifting attention around him. His very stillness carried authority, a force that seemed to extend outward, touching everyone in the immediate space. The guard's hand shifted slightly, brushing the seam of his jacket, a tiny adjustment that conveyed his internal calculation. He could feel the presence before him, the subtle dominance not in force but in controlled attention. Stephen's posture remained unwavering, shoulders relaxed, hands at ease, weight balanced perfectly. His breathing was quiet, deliberate, slow, yet each inhale and exhale was like a silent signal of measured power. The guard jaw tightened, his voice catching slightly as he tried again. "You need to wait. That's all." Stephen's eyes didn't waver. The small movement of his head, a fractional nod, was acknowledgement without submission. The tension deepened as seconds passed. Around them, even distant personnel seemed to pause mid-motion, sensing the quiet authority Stephen carried. Every minor adjustment of his stance amplified the weight of the moment. The guard's hands shifted again, fingers brushing his belt, signaling readiness, caution, or unease, perhaps all three at once. Stephen's gaze never left the guard. He didn't speak. He didn't react beyond subtle, precise adjustments that radiated control. Observers felt it instinctively, a magnetic pull in the air, the sort of tension that draws attention even without sound. The guard's stance tightened slightly, subtle micro-movements betraying growing doubt, uncertainty creeping into his carefully maintained composure. Stephen remained utterly composed, each movement measured, deliberate, and calm, unhurried, a presence that subtly demanded respect. The surrounding staff shifted, some leaning forward slightly, some exchanging glances, sensing the subtle escalation. Every footstep, every breath, every glance from Stephen seemed to slow time around the encounter. The hum of engines, the faint shuffle of feet, even distant chatter faded beneath the silent energy radiating from him. The guard's eyes narrowed, scanning for weakness, any small sign that might give him leverage, but he found none. Stephen's posture, his calm gaze, the relaxed placement of his hands, the slow measured shifts of weight, all conveyed the same message. He was aware, fully present. The subtle power in his stillness became undeniable. The tension continued to build, imperceptibly to some, yet completely tangible to those close enough to feel the weight. Every observer leaned in, drawn into the quiet gravity of the moment, sensing that something critical was unfolding, that every second mattered. Stephen's eyes swept across the area again, the smallest shift of gaze a demonstration of control, a quiet command that nothing would escape his notice. The guard's jaw tightened further, hands adjusting at his sides, shifting weight subtly, the small micro-movements signaling an internal struggle with the growing awareness of who he was dealing with. The air hung heavy with quiet anticipation. Every person on the tarmac felt it, whether staff, observers, or other personnel. Even the distant hum of the jet engines seemed to pause in deference to the tension unfolding. Stephen's calmness remained unbroken, each movement precise, each breath measured, each glance intentional. The subtle shifts, the controlled presence, the unwavering focus, all contributed to a rising tension that was almost electric, stretching time in a way that made every detail count. The guard's stance grew more rigid, a slight hesitation now apparent in his motions. Stephen adjusted his weight again, subtly, without any visible effort, maintaining balance and presence. The quiet command in his posture began to resonate with everyone nearby. The staff exchanged small, almost imperceptible looks, sensing the shift, recognizing the rising tension as something beyond ordinary protocol. The subtle stillness, the unwavering gaze, the deliberate pace, all combined to heighten the energy on the tarmac. Observers felt drawn in, the anticipation mounting as they watched the silent interaction unfold. The guard shifted again, the tension between him and Stephen thickening with each measured moment. Every breath, every subtle movement, every quiet pause contributed to the growing suspense. The energy on the tarmac had reached a point where even the smallest gesture carried weight. The slow, deliberate presence of Steven Seagal dominated the space, commanding attention without a word. Every person within sight could feel it, a quiet pull, an almost magnetic tension that seemed to anchor the moment, making every second stretch longer, heavier, more charged. The subtle adjustments in posture, the controlled breathing, the unwavering gaze, all built a rising current of energy that was palpable to anyone watching. The guard's uncertainty became increasingly visible, the smallest micro-expressions betraying the awareness that this was no ordinary man before him. Steven's stillness remained absolute, his calm, measured presence radiating outward. Every motion, no matter how slight, was amplified by the charged air, the anticipation, the quiet focus of the crowd, and the slow, deliberate unfolding of tension. Each second seemed to stretch, each micro-movement waited, as the encounter maintained its slow, escalating rhythm, precise and unbroken. Steven's presence didn't shout. It didn't need to. He simply stood, weight evenly distributed, shoulders relaxed, hands at his sides. The guard shifted again, subtly, almost imperceptibly, testing the space, testing boundaries, testing patience. Around them, staff paused mid-step, some holding clipboards, others frozen with phones half-raised, all sensing something rare, something deliberate unfolding. Steven's gaze swept the tarmac slowly, taking in every angle, every movement, every reaction without judgment, without haste. He didn't step forward. He didn't threaten. He simply existed in that space, and in that stillness, the energy shifted. The guard's fingers twitched at the seam of his jacket, a micro-movement betraying his growing awareness that the situation was no longer just procedural. Steven adjusted his stance slightly, a subtle counterbalance that spoke volumes. His calm didn't invite action. It disarmed it. The wind shifted across the tarmac, ruffling papers, tugging at jacket sleeves, and yet nothing distracted Steven from the measured awareness he maintained. Every breath he took was quiet, deliberate, and full of authority. The guard's jaw tightened. A short nod, a fractional step, a shift of eyes. Each movement revealed the inner calculation, the silent questioning of whether this confrontation could proceed as planned. Staff nearby exchanged glances, whispering quietly to one another, their curiosity piqued by the tension that grew without a single word exchanged. Steven's head tilted slightly, enough to show acknowledgement but not submission. His eyes held the guards without challenge, without intimidation, simply with presence. The subtle weight of his authority began to press outward, a force unseen yet fully felt. The guard's stance wavered, almost imperceptibly, as if the air itself reminded him he was no longer simply enforcing rules. He was measuring the consequences of every motion in that charged space. The quiet stretched longer than any word could. Every second felt heavier, filled with unspoken communication. Steven's controlled movements, the barely there shifts in weight, the calm rhythm of his breathing, all combined to create an invisible boundary, one that demanded recognition. Around them, the staff unconsciously mirrored the tension, some leaning in, some holding their positions, sensing the silent authority that required no action yet commanded full attention. Steven's presence radiated outward like ripples in still water, subtle but impossible to ignore. The guard's eyes flicked repeatedly, searching for weakness, for a hint that would justify moving forward. But Steven offered none. His every motion was minimal, precise, deliberate. He didn't overreact. He didn't signal impatience. He simply remained grounded. The wind shifted again. A plane's engine hummed in the background. Distant footsteps echoed, and yet nothing could disturb the silent command Steven held. Every small movement from the guard, the twitch of a shoulder, the lift of an eyebrow, the tightening of fingers, was mirrored internally by the tension in the air. Steven's subtle nods, slight weight shifts, and unwavering gaze conveyed understanding, control, and the quietest kind of power. The staff could feel it, the guard could feel it, The entire tarmac seemed to pause around him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it wasn't demanding. It simply existed. The space between them held meaning. The guard's hand hovered briefly at his belt, then dropped. His eyes betrayed a growing calculation. Every instinct told him that moving forward could provoke more than just conflict. It could reveal vulnerability. The stillness became a test of endurance. Observers felt the tension in their own skin, leaning forward, unconsciously holding their breath. Stephen shifted his weight ever so slightly, tiny, imperceptible, maintaining perfect balance and composure. Every small micro-movement was deliberate, yet invisible to anyone untrained in such awareness. The guard's movements became cautious, tentative, measured, revealing the subtle influence of Stephen's quiet dominance. Whispers floated through the small crowd of staff and onlookers. Phones clicked quietly, capturing the unfolding demonstration. A subtle sense of awe spread as everyone sensed that something profound was happening in silence alone. The guard's chest rose and fell, breaths measured, careful, as he assessed the situation anew. Stephen's presence was constant, unwavering, an anchor in the swirling uncertainty. Every glance, every tilt of his head, every slight adjustment of posture spoke without a single word. The quiet stretched longer, heavier, filled with anticipation, yet grounded in the unshakable calm he exuded. Eyes followed him as he shifted weight slightly from one foot to the other, hands remaining relaxed, shoulders steady, gaze steady. Every micro-action reinforced a message of authority, restraint, and unspoken command. Observers felt it instinctively, a pull of gravity in the stillness, a silent assertion that required acknowledgement. The guard's fingers drummed lightly, hesitated, then dropped. The subtle pressure of presence, the invisible yet undeniable assertion of control, pressed upon him without a single sound. The air seemed to thicken, charged with the tension of restraint. All attention was drawn to Stephen's stillness, his subtle dominance in the space, the quiet power that radiated outward without declaration. Every breath, every slight micro-movement, every calm blink held meaning. The staff, the guard, even distant personnel felt the weight. Then, in that moment, the unspoken question hovered, crystal clear in the minds of everyone present. If you were Stephen, would you have confronted the guard directly or waited silently? The guard's posture shifted once more, the smallest indication of uncertainty. Stephen's subtle sway, his calm gaze, and quiet command maintained the pressure, demonstrating mastery without a single word. Seconds stretched, nearly imperceptibly, each one filled with silent conversation between presence and challenge. The guard's breath hitched slightly, a small micro-expression of doubt crossing his face. Stephen's stillness remained complete, absolute, radiating calm authority outward like a force field. Every tiny adjustment reinforced the same truth. Restraint can dominate where aggression fails. Observers felt the energy, each heartbeat syncing with the silent rhythm of the encounter. Every glance from Stephen carried weight. Every slight movement measured. Every blink deliberate. The guard now held still, uncertain, caught in the slow rhythm Stephen created. The tarmac seemed to shrink around them. The quiet stretched, heavy and electric, every observer feeling the gravity of unspoken power. Stephen's presence remained unwavering, grounding the energy, commanding attention without demand, demonstrating the force of disciplined silence. Each micro-movement, each slight tilt of the head, each controlled breath reinforced the silent message. Tension pulsed through the air like a living current, binding everyone present to the stillness, the restraint, the undeniable authority. Observers leaned in, collective awareness sharpened, fully absorbed in the silent demonstration of power. Every inch of Stephen's body spoke without words. Every gesture precise, measured, intentional. The guard's posture shifted, tentative, and the air held steady, thick with anticipation. Each second extended, Every micro-movement became magnified. Stephen's calm remained absolute, unshakable, dominating without aggression. The subtle energy radiated, affecting every observer and participant. The quiet was nearly tangible, the power nearly audible in its stillness. Every action, every pause, every breath reinforced the same truth. Restraint, presence, and deliberate calm can command authority far more effectively than force. The air between them shifted almost imperceptibly, like the slow turning of tide. The guard's stance changed, just enough for anyone watching closely to notice. A slight lean backward, a fraction of hesitation in his step. Stephen didn't move. He stayed grounded, steady, unshaken, letting the subtle energy of his calm presence fill the space. Around them, staff held their positions, glancing from one to the other, sensing the invisible exchange. The guard's eyes flicked repeatedly, measuring, calculating, testing boundaries he once thought were firmly in his control. Stephen's gaze remained soft but unwavering, aware of every micro-expression, every twitch of muscle, every flicker of doubt. The slight change in the guard's posture was enough to ripple through the small crowd. Phones hovered uncertainly in the air, staff whispered under their breath, and a quiet sense of anticipation spread outward. Each moment of stillness stretched longer, carrying weight, demanding attention, without a single word exchanged. The guard's movements became more tentative, as if the air itself had reminded him that force alone could no longer dictate the encounter. Stephen's breathing remained slow, deliberate, and every slight adjustment of weight was precise, measured, a silent signal of control. The subtle shift was more powerful than any shout or gesture could have been. Every observer could feel it, the invisible pressure of authority that didn't demand recognition but naturally drew it. The guard's fingers twitched, then dropped to his side. His jaw tightened, a small but clear acknowledgement of the changing dynamic. Stephen didn't smile. He didn't react. He simply allowed the tension to exist, controlled, balanced, almost magnetic in its quiet influence. The staff and onlookers leaned in, sensing the change in the room's energy. The guard's posture faltered again, a pause longer than instinct dictated, and the subtle shift became undeniable. Control had moved, quietly but unmistakably, from one side to the other. Everyone present felt the moment. Authority does not need to be declared. It can be embodied. The space between them, now, carried meaning, a silent conversation that required no words. Each micro-movement from Stephen reinforced the invisible boundary, and each hesitant step from the guard acknowledged it. Observers noticed the tension soften, the aggression ease, the room itself taking a collective breath. A single, careful glance from Stephen confirmed what had changed. The subtle shift was complete. Power had moved without force, without confrontation, simply through presence, restraint, and deliberate awareness. The guard's eyes reflected the recognition, small but undeniable, that the balance had quietly, irrevocably shifted. The guard's confidence had begun to waver, though he didn't fully realize it yet. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a subtle sign of uncertainty, testing whether the quiet authority standing before him was something he could challenge or needed to respect. Stephen remained perfectly still, every movement minimal, every breath measured, yet the tension in the air was almost tangible. Around them, the hum of the tarmac faded into the background as the focus tightened on this invisible battle of presence. The guard's hands twitched, fingers brushing the edge of his belt, a nervous reflex he didn't fully notice. His eyes darted briefly toward the staff, seeking reassurance, but all he found were attentive stares and the silent weight of Stephen's calm gaze. The subtle pause in the guard's rhythm became a turning point, a moment where hesitation replaced certainty and doubt crept into his posture. Stephen didn't make a move. He didn't advance or retreat. He simply existed in that space with total awareness, every inch of his body conveying control and calm authority. The air seemed to respond, as if a subtle shift of energy pulled at everyone nearby. Staff leaned forward slightly, some exhaling softly, as if the quiet dominance radiating from Stephen had rewritten the rules of the encounter. The guard stance faltered again, a fraction of hesitation that would have been imperceptible to anyone not looking closely. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing slightly, and a subtle internal conflict became apparent. Should he push forward, relying on procedure and the illusion of control? Or should he step aside, acknowledging the undeniable calm that radiated from Stephen? The question hovered, unspoken, heavy with consequence. Stephen's gaze remained fixed, soft yet unwavering, and the quiet strength in his presence left no space for rash decisions. The guard's fingers unclenched and fell to his sides, his body shifting minutely as he recalculated. The moment stretched, long and deliberate, filled with anticipation, with the subtle energy of control moving imperceptibly across the space. Every observer could feel it, the unspoken lesson unfolding. No movement was needed, no words were required. The tension alone communicated the balance of power, and the guard's awareness of it was growing with every passing second. The subtle, invisible command in Stephen's posture, in his measured breathing, in the slight adjustment of weight, made it clear that the choice of action rested entirely on the other person. Would you have stepped aside immediately or try to hold your ground like the guard? The staff shifted slightly, leaning in closer, all senses tuned to the unfolding moment. The guard's feet shuffled, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement that the stillness around him was no longer a passive presence. Every micro-expression on his face mirrored the internal debate. Assert authority and risk confrontation, or yield to the unspoken power radiating from Stephen. The turning point had arrived without a single strike, without a single raised voice. Observers felt the air thicken, the quiet stretching longer, heavier, each second magnifying the weight of the choice. Stephen's subtle adjustments, slight shifts of weight, tiny head tilts, measured breathing, reinforced his control, yet he remained passive, almost invisible in his dominance. The guard's body language now mirrored uncertainty. Should he continue to resist, or accept the silent authority before him? The tarmac seemed to shrink, the space between them charged with awareness, restraint, and deliberate calm. Staff and onlookers held their collective breath, witnessing the invisible balance of power pivot subtly, irrevocably. The guard's shoulders slumped fractionally, a micro-movement revealing recognition of a shift. Every step he considered was weighed carefully against the presence of Stephen, every micro-motion a test of his own judgment. The turning point had been achieved not by action, not by words, but by the quiet, deliberate authority of someone who did not need to strike to command respect. Every observer felt it, every breath synchronized with the stillness, the tension, the unspoken understanding that the choice of next move had become critical. Stephen's gaze remained fixed, unwavering, patient, and calm, leaving the guard to confront the reality of the situation and the lesson silently unfolding before everyone present. The guard finally stepped back, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the invisible boundary that had been drawn. Stephen didn't react. He simply stood still, letting the pause linger, letting the quiet authority he carried speak louder than any words could. Around them, the crowd exhaled collectively, the tension in the air dissolving slowly, replaced by a subtle sense of awe. Staff shifted, some stepping slightly aside, others watching with wide eyes, sensing the shift had come not from confrontation, but from presence. The subtle energy that had built in the previous moments seemed to settle, grounding the space in an unexpected calm. Stephen adjusted his stance, a minimal movement, careful, measured, yet enough to signal that he was fully aware of his surroundings, fully in control, yet not seeking conflict. The guard's eyes met his, a fleeting recognition passing between them, an unspoken understanding that the display of power had already been established, that restraint can command more than force ever could. The soft shuffle of feet, the faint clearing of throats, the subtle exchanges of glances, all marked the quiet acceptance of what had occurred. Phones lowered slowly, but the weight of the moment lingered, etched into the minds of everyone present. Stephen's posture remained calm, relaxed, yet alert, a living example of control. The guard straightened slightly, no longer tense, no longer challenging, simply present in the aftermath of a lesson learned without a word raised in anger. Observers could feel it, the invisible authority, the quiet power that had shifted the dynamic completely. Every micro-expression, every subtle breath, every deliberate pause contributed to a resolution that was both complete and understated. Stephen moved a fraction, nothing dramatic, yet enough to signal the continuation of his calm journey. The staff exhaled softly, onlookers murmured quietly, and the guard, now still, seemed to carry the weight of the encounter in a measured, contemplative way. The space that had been charged with tension now hummed with a quiet understanding. Respect can be earned through presence, through discipline, through calm authority. No one spoke immediately, but the room collectively acknowledged the resolution, the invisible boundaries respected, the lesson internalized. Each person present seemed to absorb the moment differently, yet all understood the subtle truth. Control had been maintained, aggression neutralized, and authority demonstrated without conflict. Stephen finally lifted his gaze briefly to the surroundings, a small, deliberate acknowledgement of everyone's attention, and took a step forward, measured, purposeful, carrying the calm momentum of the resolution with him.